So I'm pleased to introduce Sarah Lancaster as our speaker today. Sarah, I've worked with for many years in our roles here at K-State. I've asked her to go through and talk about weed management in the age of technology. And I think this is a hot topic that and is very much kind of on the cutting edge of weed control. And so, yes, Sarah, I think we're all set if you're ready to take over.
All right, let's see if you can hear me.
Yes,
Confirm
I can
that
hear
one.
you.
All right, and oh, wait, I messed up. Let's see here. Oh, I said I wasn't going to touch anything, and I touched things. All right,
Guys,
look at
anytime
this.
we do this, we have lots of things running in the background, so it's hard sometimes to get the right screen to share.
Now, you should be good to go, right?
Yes, we can see your
Okay.
presentation.
All right. Thanks, Jeannie. And
Yes.
thanks, folks, for joining us today to talk about weed management in the age of new technology. So, today we're going to focus on site-specific weed management and targeted spraying. I know there are lots of questions about drones, and there's just there's still a lot of things unfolding there. I suspect that Deepak will talk about drones when he does his Crop Talk webinar here in a couple of weeks. So we'll leave that for him and we'll focus mostly on sprayers today. So I wanted to set the stage quickly just by talking about what is site-specific weed management. I'm sure most of the folks listening to this webinar are familiar with the idea of site-specific fertility management, maybe seed placement, things of that nature. And so weed management is analogous, right? It's just putting the right product in the right place at the right time. And it has all the same benefits as other types of site-specific management. One thing I will say is that part of what has kind of held weed science back compared to some of the other areas of agronomy in terms of site-specific management is really just computing power, processing power, things of that nature. I mean, way back in the dark ages when I was in graduate school, I had peers who were working on some of the early versions of WeedSeeker, right? And some of those other early systems. So it's not that the technology or the concept is novel. It's more that we have the supporting technology in terms of the sensors and the processors in place now to start to make this something we can have on farm. Another sort of academic piece before we get started is that you will probably hear me slip up and say spot spraying from time to time throughout this presentation, but just want to make sure that we're all clear on kind of the distinction between the types of applications that we're going to talk about today and what would be kind of historically considered a spot spray application. So the kinds of things we're largely going to talk about today are what we would consider targeted applications. Okay, this is a directed, not a spot spraying application, which we think about by hand or maybe from a UTV, something of that nature. Targeted spraying is also not prescription spraying. Okay, the systems we're talking about today are the systems that can detect weeds in real time and spray only those locations where there are weeds. You might notice in the bottom of this screen, there's a little square icon that says War Against Weeds. We actually have a couple of podcast episodes where we've talked with a variety of folks about targeted spraying and other types of new weed management technology. So if you're interested in hearing some additional thoughts and maybe alternative perspectives on this topic, please do feel free to just search up the War Against Weeds podcast and then listen to those episodes. So I guess I wanted to start, Jeannie, we probably should have talked this through before we went live, but I don't think we have actual polling questions put together for this, but I'm curious for the audience to know what targeted spraying systems are you aware of? Oh, look, they did it for me. Yay. Jeannie always takes good care of us.
Yes, there is a poll up there. So folks, you can go in. It's a short answer, so you should be able to type an answer in to answer that poll question. Now, if that does not work, just go ahead and put it in the chat box here, and we can do that.
Perfect. So The last couple of times I have given this presentation, I've learned about new ones, right? So Jeannie and I worked together to collect some data that we'll talk about near the end of this presentation. And since we started that project, I've learned about new systems coming to the market and being available in Kansas. So it's always good for me to kind of ground truth what folks in the field are seeing and learning. So,
Okay, I've got eight. There's nine answers. We'll give you guys about 5 more seconds. I feel like type fast, type fast.
it's sort of
Okay,
like writing on a blackboard under pressure.
it totally is. Okay. Oh,
Let's
so Sarah,
see.
I'm not sure if you can see this,
I
uh,
cannot see that at the
but
moment,
I
Jeannie.
don't know what's, we apparently didn't get it quite set up right. Okay, so I will roll through. So Symphony by Precision Planting,
Hmm.
and it just disappeared. Give me just a sec. Okay, John Deere See and Spray, Green Seeker, Hand Spraying, See and Spray, Spot and Spray, John Deere See and Spray, Weed It, and John Deere See and Spray.
Okay, so that's a pretty good representation, Jeannie. Thanks, guys, for answering that question too. But
Yes.
that's a pretty good representation of what we think we are seeing out and about. Jeannie, did you have more? Sorry.
No, that is all. That's what I've got.
Okay,
One more See and Spray. There we go.
okay. So this slide kind of depicts the systems that I'm aware of. So I would say, based on conversations that I've had, the most popular in Kansas are the John Deere See and Spray and the Weed It system. I know that precision planting is coming in. Weed Seeker is an older system we talked about. I've heard folks saying that Green Eye is making a play. Augmenta is the partnership for the case machines. Um, AgriFac is on there. Um, previous iterations of this slide, I had the One Smart Spray system, which was a joint venture with BASF and a European manufacturer. But I don't know what their play is for the American market at the moment. So these are the ones that I'm aware of that might be worth, having additional conversations about or folks looking into. So continuing to just think about sort of what is the baseline information we need here about these systems. They are all comprised of really three main components. You've got a camera or a sensor, if you want to sound very jargony, that would be a sensor. Processor, so basically computers on board the machine, and then nozzles. So one of the things about a lot of these systems is pulse width modulation is required in order to turn the nozzles off and on with the signals coming from the cameras or the sensors. When I think about these systems, though, I really start to divide them into two main types. Okay, and this is based on how they sense the weeds. So one type of system would be green on brown. And so these systems are going to be able to detect a green weed against a non-green background. So some of the names that you might be familiar with that work in this way would be Weed Seeker, Weed It, or in the John Deere line of things, the See and Spray Select. Okay, so Seeker and Weed It would be kind of aftermarket versions, and then See and Spray Select would come from the factory with the cameras and such. The other type of system is green on green. And so you can see that list there on your screen of green on green types of systems. And these are systems that can detect the weed in the crop. And to my understanding, the way most of these systems are identifying the weed is they can identify the crop row, and then they kind of remove that crop row from the equation, and they look at everything that is not the crop that's green in that field. And so they're detecting weeds based on kind of what's not the crop. So that's how most of those systems are working. Another way to distinguish between these systems that can have some important implications is what type of sensor they have. So there's two different kinds of sensors based on how they are set up to receive light. So one type of system has an active light source or is an active sensor, which has its own light source. And you can see the list there of examples of systems that have active sensors. So one of the advantages of these sensors is that they're going to be less affected by ambient light in the environment. The alternative to this would be a passive sensor. And so these are sensors that require that rely on light from the sun in order to see what's going on. So the See and Spray Ultimate and the See and Spray Premium systems are passive sensors. And that will come into play when we talk about some of the data points that Jeannie and I collected over the last year or so. Another distinction between these systems is that a couple of them have dual booms and tanks. Okay, and so this allows us to be potentially a little more, I'll use the term creative, or maybe intentional is a better word, with how we're designing our herbicide applications. So the two systems that I'm aware of that have the dual booms and tanks are the See and Spray Ultimate and the Green Eye. The nice thing about this is that it lets us maintain a broadcast application with one part of the system, while the other part of the system is doing a targeted application. There's some thoughts that this could be used to, for example, overcome or optimize tank conditions. So if you have, for example, two different products that require two different adjuvant systems or something of that nature, possibly. Another place where folks started looking at benefits of the two boom system is to avoid incompatibility or antagonism, so reduced weed control. And so this work that I'm showing you here was actually, it was done at Mississippi State before the See and Spray units hit the market. And so what they were looking at was weed control with combinations of group 4 herbicides. So if you get your magnifying glass out there, you can see that they had an Ingenia type of product, they had an Extendamax type of product, they had an Enlist One type of product, and then like a LV type of 240 with and without glyphosate. Okay, so they were trying to see which system or how this different systems would affect antagonism um, for those particular herbicide applications in terms of grass control by glyphosate. So things to point out here, they've got the glyphosate alone is sort of the maximum possibility. And then the tank mixed together, direct inject, so mixing in line. And then separate boom is this dark red or maroon colored bar here on the far right of each of those weeds. Let's look at the Italian ryegrass. I know not a super problem for Western Kansas, but southern portions of Kansas can have problems with Italian ryegrass here. So you can see glyphosate alone the weed control achieved by separating the applications was statistically similar to glyphosate alone, whereas the tank mix and the inline mix, there was reduced weed control. Okay, that story holds true also for signal grass, and somewhat so for the millet, in the sense that the direct inject system had lower control compared to the separate boom system. Now, the caveat here is that there's since been a newer research with the See and Spray system out of Nebraska and Indiana. And those projects, they haven't been published in the peer-reviewed literature yet, but they've been presented at conferences and they actually contradict each other. And that's pretty common with antagonism work. So if you guys have heard me give the tank mixing and antagonism information about weed management, you know that I'll tell you that antagonism is hard to predict, and really the only way to truly overcome it is to make two totally separate applications. So these two boom, two tank systems might be a way to overcome herbicide antagonism. I wanted to share a little bit. I know there's lots of numbers floating around, and this is just a one-off at the moment, but this is a demonstration that we did at a farm in South Central Kansas, and our numbers showed that we treated about 55% of the area covered with the See and Spray application. So you can see we did strips where we did not have a See and Spray application. So the strips where there's no gray or yellow, we turn the See and Spray off. And then you can see the strips with the yellow is the application that was made by the See and Spray. The other map on this slide is actually the yield map. So we were looking to just compare some simple agronomics there. Now, we did that with a commercial machine. There are a group of like 4 weed scientists, maybe 6 weed scientists in the US that have these sort of mini See and Spray systems that mount to like a tractor. And so they've been doing some small plot work with these systems. And one of these projects has recently been published. The work was done at the University of Arkansas, and they were comparing a big list of treatments to kind of look at different application timings with different types of applications. So specifically looking at a broadcast application is sort of our standard, and then the targeted application versus the two boom type of application where they broadcast a residual herbicide. So we know we're getting good pre-emergence control, but then they also went back and used a targeted application for their post-emergence products. And so this was done with Ingenia and Select. So this is an example of a system where we would anticipate some antagonism and maybe some loss of weed control in the grasses. But I'm going to focus today on the Palmer amaranth control. And I just pulled a subset of the data that I thought would tell a nice story here. So what we have on this slide is influence of the early post-emergence application method on Palmer amaranth control 2 weeks after the application, so 14 days after the application. And what I want you to see here is that statistically there were no differences among the types of applications that they used. Now, this is an interesting benefit of these systems. They also measured soybean injury. If you guys have used a product like Warrant or an acetochlor type of product as your layered residual herbicide, you've probably seen crop response. And again, you know, this was done in soybeans. Anecdotally, I'll share some comments from some farmers that have done the similar thing in grain sorghum, and we can talk about that more in a little bit. But what they found is that when they had the broadcast residual plus the targeted application of Ingenia and Select, they had the greatest soybean injury. They had the least amount of soybean injury when they used the targeted application system. So as we start to think about, you know, really fine tuning our production systems and our yield potential, not having that herbicide injury, even though, you know, we may not consider it to be, you know, yield limiting on the whole field basis, it can still have some negative effects on plant growth and plant health. So this may be a way where we can kind of get around some of that. Okay, here's our next polling question. I'll give Jeannie just a second to pull it up for you guys. But I guess my question is, what type of targeted application system do you think has the most potential usefulness in your operation? So, you know, green on green versus green on brown would be one way you could answer that. Single tank, dual tank would be another way you could answer that. You could answer both ways at one shot. I'm just curious to know what you guys think.
Okay,
Is
the
it running,
poll
Jeannie?
question, yeah, the poll question is up, so you guys should be able to share it or see it. Go ahead and type your answers into the short answer box, and I think I figured out how to share them, Sarah. So while you were doing that, I did a little bit of investigating, so I think I figured it out.
Okay. I have a minor concern that it might be the way I've got my monitor set up, so hopefully
Well, no,
it's not me.
it opened up in the internet browser, which I was not expecting. So,
Ah, gotcha.
okay, we've got 7 answers. If you guys want to keep typing here, we'll go ahead and give you about 5 more seconds to go ahead and get Sarah's question here answered on which type of targeted application system do you think has the most potential usefulness in your operation? I was just ready to hit stop and one just popped in. So if you're still typing, type fast. Okay, we'll go ahead and end the poll here. Okay, share results. Huh, still does not do it. I don't know what the answer is here on this. What
Well,
I
we
am,
practiced some things beforehand. We should have practiced that too.
I guess, I guess so. Okay, so let me read the answers to you. Okay, on this question, green on, okay, green on brown, dual
Mhm.
tank, first green on brown, second green on brown, uh, green on brown with dual tank ability to apply residuals, both, green on green, dual tank, green on brown, single tank, green on brown, dual tank, green on green, and dual tank.
Okay, so there's a lot of variety in there.
There is a lot of variety in here. Yeah.
I thought maybe I'd get some clear direction on research topics.
All
The
of it,
answer is
Sarah,
all
all
the
of it.
above. All right. So this is the study that I made reference to, and sort of my preliminary material here. And admittedly, this is a very different type of study for Jeannie and me to have done. So the genesis here, I'm guessing most folks on this webinar know Lucas Haig. So Lucas reached out to Jeannie and I and said, Jeannie and me, and said that, hey, we need to figure out what these guys that are early adopters of targeted application systems. We need to figure out kind of what makes them tick, what's making them make this decision. And so I reached out to Gaia Hawk, who is a colleague over in Ag Ed. And Gaia has been giving us a crash course in social science research to answer this question that Lucas posed. And so we started out, those first couple of years when See and Spray was in Kansas. We found 7 farmers to begin with, and then we added another 10 potential folks to talk to. We actually got a hold of 11 farmers. Um, Actually, Jeannie, the number is 12, but I haven't incorporated our last one into this slide set yet. So we interviewed 11 farmers between May and August. Some things to know about these folks, the folks that we talked to, of the 11, 9 were the person who, were the primary decision maker. So they saw the technology, they decided they wanted to try the technology, and they made the decision to purchase or lease the technology. The remaining 2, they were basically multi-generational operations, and one generation saw the technology and was interested in the technology, but the other person was really kind of the business manager, and so they had to kind of convince their partners to make the purchase. This is a map that depicts where our farmers were located. So most of them would be central and western Kansas. We are starting to see more, I'll call them the second generation users here in Eastern Kansas. But at the time we were doing these interviews, um, the Salina area was about as far east as we found folks who were willing to talk with us. Um, this map also depicts what types of systems our interviewees were using. So In the West, we had a couple of See and Spray Ultimates. We had one operation that had one of each type of See and Spray system. We had a couple of operations that were running Weedits. And then we had a couple of operations that had previously run Weedits and now had See and Spray Selects. So they had kind of shifted a little bit. The folks we talked to, average age was about 44 years old. The number of acres sprayed in each operation was all over the board. Ranged from about 7,000 acres up to 350,000 acres. And so that's not, acres farmed, that's acres sprayed with the machine. So our average number there was about 72,000. I think this is an important piece of information for folks to consider, this next piece, and that is that the average acres that they chose to spray with the site-specific technology or the targeted herbicide application technology was 20 to 70%. Okay. The average was 44, so under half. And I think that fact underscores the point that not every acre is going to be well suited for this technology. Even if a farm as a whole opts to utilize the technology, it may not be the best fit for every acre. Now, I will say that I think especially with the deer technology, the licensing structure is going to affect how folks view that. So it'll be interesting to see how maybe this number changes going forward as Deere modifies their licensing structure, their per acre fee. Another fact is that 7 of the 11 participants had a second sprayer on their operation. So they were sending that targeted sprayer where they thought it would be most useful and keeping their broadcast machine for the other applications. 6 of the 11 used a quick draw system, so a good Kansas product there. Everyone had something like a quick draw, though, whether it was their kind of homemade version or a competitor. Okay, so we asked these guys a series of questions, and what I've done and what I'm going to share are some representative answers to some of the questions that I thought might be most useful for you guys to hear about. So the first question is, how much training do you think will be needed for a targeted sprayer compared to a non-site specific sprayer? Okay. Those answers were all over the board. Some of the Weed It users that we talked to actually said their systems are easier to run than their conventional sprayer. Other folks, for example, the folks with the John Deere See and Spray Premium system, they felt like you need a little bit more skilled operator just because there's kind of a few more moving parts, more things to keep track of. But literally, hear that quote, literally, it's just 3 clicks on the screen to go from targeted application to broadcast. So they felt like it was not that challenging. And then the See and Spray Ultimate guys, they said quite a bit. And, having been around that system a little bit, there's a lot to think about in terms of especially loading that system. The other part that folks tend to kind of worry about with kind of that training piece is getting guys to figure out what to do with excess herbicide or excess mix in a particular batch. And so pretty much to a man, the guys that we talked to said that the way they were handling that, right? Because you mix a batch and you don't know what percentage of your field you're going to treat. So the way they were treating that is they've got to have an operator in that cab that is paying attention enough to know that if they've got 20 acres of spray left in their tank, when they get to 20 acres left in the field, they've got to broadcast that herbicide so they don't have extra that they have to deal with some other way. Okay, how did a site-specific sprayer change these operations? This was another one where we got some good variety and some things that I think might be of interest to folks today. So the first one, kind of a no-brainer, right? This lines up with a lot of the marketing that we hear around these machines. We're more efficient with chemicals and we think we're lower cost. So they're spraying less area with their post-emergence herbicides. Um, the biggest change for us was seeing the results on field bindweed is kind of the bottom end of that quote. This particular farmer was running the See and Spray Ultimate in grain sorghum, which the backstory on that, guys, is that there is not a button on the monitor that says I'm spraying grain sorghum. But you guys all know how similar corn and grain sorghum are when they're in those early vegetative stages. So they were using the corn model or the corn button in the cab or on the monitor and using that to spot spray quinclorac for field bindweed control. So they felt like that was a win. Other ways, this one was interesting. This was a younger farmer that made this comment about the fact that they liked to have this information and the maps and the data from the monitors when they go and talk to their landlords. They felt like it was a big talking point and that it made their landlords feel very positive about their farming operation. So they felt like it was helping them in that way. The probably most extreme comment that we got was one of the Wheat It farmers said that that technology allowed them to convert from tillage in their fallow system over to no-till in their fallow system, just because they were able to get across the land faster and were using less herbicide with each pass. We asked guys what did they think were the greatest benefits of their sprayer. The ultimate users to a person said that it was economic savings. They also talked around, reducing weed pressure in the long run. And I think that actually, from a weed management perspective, is probably related to this third bullet down here. I think guys are going to be more apt to go out and spray stuff earlier. Jeannie, I'll put a plug for our weed schools later this week. I was just working on a slide about the importance of spraying earlier in the emergence of weed flushes, right? That way the weeds that are out there are at an appropriate size to control. And I think with a system like this, we could convince folks to go out and spray those early flushes, knowing that the herbicide cost should come out pretty even if they have to go back and make a second pass for a later flush. So I think that's big from a weed management perspective. Some folks did mention the environmental impact, just the idea of being good stewards of their land and not using any more product than necessary. And then the select owners and the weeded owners, pretty much to a person, talked about time savings. They really liked the idea that they could fill their tank in the morning and basically spray all day, and not have to refill and not have to deal with, a tendering setup. All right, greatest limitations of these sprayers. When I show this slide, I like to kind of wink and nod and say, notice that the font on this slide is a lot smaller than the previous one. But I think that that's because these are just new technologies, folks. We're still figuring out how to use them. They're still refining the machines themselves. So what are the greatest limitations? The green on green systems, a lot of folks expressed concern about coverage, and that concept actually came up as well with the See and Spray Select and weeded owners too. Just there's a psychological piece, I think, about seeing, I think the term that the farmers like to use is that fog when they have the herbicide coming out all across that spray boom. And so that they know that that's not there. So there's a thought that perhaps they're getting less coverage. Speed can be a limitation if you've got to cover acres and your machine is kind of governed at 15 miles per hour. If you want to use targeted application, that is definitely a limitation for some folks. One of my Western Kansas farmers talked about the fact that because of heat, sometimes they need to spray at night in order to have an effective application. But with that ultimate system, remember I said it's a passive sensor, so it needs sunlight in order to work. Also, multiple folks talked about issues with dust or shading based on the angle of light interfering with the cameras. And On the deer systems, that causes the machines to go into what they call fallback mode. So it defaults back to being a broadcast sprayer if the cameras are not kind of within spec and seeing the weeds the way they want to. Um, Probably the kind of elephant in the room with these systems. Cost is the biggest barrier for a lot of folks. And also the subscription fee, right? Not only is there an economic piece there, there's also kind of a psychological piece to getting around that subscription fee. And so the last one here, uneven terrain. When you are in a situation where that boom height gets above the tolerance levels for the machine, it's going to again go into fallback mode. Jeannie and I actually saw a as applied map a while back, and you could see the terraces in the field based on when the machine went into fallback mode and the spray volume went up. Were you going to say something, Jeannie?
I was just gonna say we did not have to be out in the field or see a topographical map for this because you could very much see where the terrace is laid because you could tell that the boom was kicking on all the way along those, and in some cases, so for some folks that's not going to be a concern, but we have a fair amount of areas that we have terraces of some sort that are causing them to kick on and off, and so the farmers that we were visiting with were wondering, if there was something else that they could be setting something different that would not cause them to have that kick on all the way going over a terrace.
Yeah, I mean, the thinking is, I guess, if you're going to use the technology, you want to use the technology, not have it kind of default back to broadcast.
Correct. Yes. Yeah.
The last comment on this slide, because you're probably spraying earlier and you're spraying small weeds, especially with those single tank systems, you're probably going to have to make more passes. So that's another concern there. So kind of summarizing things there, opportunities, herbicide savings was generally viewed as the most important, especially next would be time savings, which would be especially true for the green on brown systems. Long-term improvements in weed control, if we can time things better because we're not waiting to get that full flush. Reduced crop injury for the green on green systems, I think has the potential to really kind of get folks' attention. And then I'm kind of preaching to the choir with this last bullet point here, but conserving water resources, right? Just the ability to better manage weeds, especially in the fallow system, has a big impact. Summary of obstacles. I think the biggest one there is just staying out of fallback mode and all the things that can cause the deer systems to go into fallback mode. Coverage, again, I'm not sure how much of that is accurate versus how much of that is psychological. I know that there are some folks looking at research, looking at different nozzle types to use in these systems that might improve coverage. Another psychological piece is just trusting that the cameras are going to see the small weeds. There's data out there on some of that that we could look at a different time. The next one on this list, there is no grain sorghum algorithm. Um, you know, I tongue in cheek sometimes talk about being a extension specialist for folks farming in the fringe acres. And that's just kind of the world that we have to live in is figuring out how to take the iState technology and make it work for us. And so using that corn algorithm to spray grain sorghum with these systems is one way to do that. There are going to be a ton of questions around economics for these systems. In addition to the initial price, I have questions about what does this do for used sprayer values? I'm not enough of an ag economist to ask that question, but I think it's something that needs to be considered. And then thinking about how custom applicators make this work. It seems to me like there's a couple of pretty distinct camps. There's the ones that are jumping in with both feet and trying to make it work, and then there's others that are kind of more resistant. So that will be interesting to watch that play out in the future. Other considerations, I mentioned not every acre is going to be suited for a targeted herbicide application. So I think it's important to think about what percentage of your acres are suitable for this. And really what that comes down to is how well are we managing weeds early in the season? In terms of the green on green types of systems, and then the green on brown systems, it's going to have more to do with how well have we managed those weeds in the past? Are we using a residual herbicide? Questions of which I hope the answer to that is yes, but questions of that nature. Other things to figure out, it is more complicated to tender those dual tank systems. The folks that have embraced the technology have found ways to work around it. There are still some regulatory questions. For example, if you've heard me talk about things related to the label changes caused by the EPA's compliance with the Endangered Species Act, targeted spraying is worth mitigation points. You can earn mitigation points by having treated a smaller portion of the field. The sticking point, though, comes in that we don't know how to predict how much we're going to spray ahead of time. So if you're in a situation where you need those points to be compliant, it could be tough to gauge that, at least at first. I think as we get field histories and maps of these weed densities or weed populations across the field, we'll start to be able to be more consistent based on the herbicide programs we're using in the field history. I also think we're kind of scratching the surface of what we can do with these systems, just in terms of the type of research that has been done. A lot of the comments in the research is focused on the role of the layered residual herbicide as a broadcast or overcoming antagonism. One of the things that my group experimented with last year was looking at using the weed maps developed by these systems to build prescription herbicide applications for residual herbicides in the following year. Now, I don't want you to think I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth here. It's important that we put an effective rate across, of residual herbicide across the field. Okay, but what we did is we were trying to fine tune that rate or apply a slightly greater rate based on last year's weed density map or weed population map. And so in this first run, we tried to overlay soil texture as well as weed density, but I'm not sure we're going to see enough variability with soil texture across the field to have much of an interaction there with the weed density map. But so we're going to repeat this year, just looking at the, excuse me, previous year's as applied map or weed density map and making a prescription for our spring residual herbicides. So we'll take the farmer's desired base rates and then we'll bump that rate where we see those weed populations from years past. Okay. And so this is just an example of the as applied map from the field we worked on this year. And then I did have an undergraduate student. We kind of ran this first year as what we called a pilot study. So Lino put this poster together for the Weed Science meetings in Kansas City in December. And so, rough data analysis, we were looking at similar control, or I'm sorry, similar yield, whether we had the broadcast or the variable rate application of the residual herbicides, and then Lino put some dollars to that. And so we were actually saving a little bit of money in those uh, strips where we had the variable rate application. So I think, the future for this type of technology and related technologies, we didn't talk about drones today, but definitely, they're going to have an increasing role to play in our weed management systems. I think there's a lot to be discovered, and it'll be exciting for me to talk with farmers and agronomists about ways that you all think we can better utilize this technology going forward. So with that, I think we're pretty much right on time here, Jeannie, to allow some time for questions, but I do want to encourage folks to reach out if they have questions related to this or any other topics that we don't have time to get to today.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. So, folks, if you have questions, so you can put them in the Q&A box down at the bottom. We'll get those fed to Sarah. If you're having trouble getting things typed in, you can raise your hand and I can unmute you. So if that would work easier. Please do that so that because I know sometimes we're struggling with technology here. So, okay.
Hey, Jeannie, I'm
Yes.
reading our behind the scenes chat.
Yes. Yes.
Luke asked about a plug for CatCon, I think is what they're calling it. Folks probably know it as CARTA from years past, March 7th in Clay Center.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, it looks like we've got one question here. Does a see and spray record the weed type and density to use for next season?
If I had my way, we would get a species by species identification, but we don't have that at this point in time. Um, the system does gauge relative density just based on, the amount of greenness that is there. So as a weed scientist, I think of weed density as like number of plants in an area, but what they're doing, how they're getting that number for weed density is more just based on how much non-crop green did they see in that area. So it could be one really big plant or it could be several small plants.
Okay, are there any other questions? I'll
Do you
ask,
want me to?
sorry, I
I
asked
can
Erin.
roll.
Is there any? Sorry, Sarah.
There's a couple more here in the Q&A. Do you guys want me to go through them?
Yes,
Yeah, I
please.
wasn't sure. Okay. All right. So, next question. With targeted herbicide application, is the herbicide rate per acre recorded only for the treated acres or the whole field? This is not the first time I've got this question. We are thinking about rates per treated acre, not rates per field acre, if that distinction makes sense. So, okay.
Was there another question, Sarah, in the Q&A?
Um,
No?
I think those are the ones we need to talk about for
Okay.
this. Did Aaron have any from YouTube?
No questions on YouTube at this time.
Okay,
Okay.
perfect.
Okay. As you can see in the slide there, my name is Sandra Wick. I'm the Post Rock Extension District Crop Production Agent. As you can see there, we have a link for you in the chat for filling out the survey. Also, there's a QR code there if you would rather do it that way. Also, those certified crop advisors, if you will remember to email Jeannie again because you had to do it at the beginning and at the end in order to get credit. So make sure you email her at jfalkjones@ksu.edu. And again, we would like to thank Sarah for joining us today and for sharing us information on technology with controlling weeds. And as you can see, our next crop talk will be next Tuesday, February 18th. And that topic will be getting the most out of your irrigation water. And our guest speaker will be Dr. Jonathan Aguilar, and from noon to 1 p.m., and that is Central Standard Time. If you would like to go back and listen to the recording again, you are welcome to do that. It will be posted on the Northwest website on where you got the handouts. And it looks like, Aaron, we have one more related question in the Q&A for you, Miss Sarah.
Sarah, the question
Oh,
is, how do you know how much to load before running the field? And I think that's a topic that we heard a lot when we were doing some of these interviews.
yeah, it's definitely one of the challenges um, that folks have. I will tell you that one of the first interviews I did, um, you know, they indicated that they felt like by the time they got, halfway through the season, they were able to kind of windshield scout or scout their fields and get a pretty good handle on how much they needed. That to me, that's one of the downsides of using some of these systems is that it's more challenging to be flexible with your tank mix partners because you don't want to have a whole bunch of extra. You want to have one, batch that you're running across everything, which, for some folks they're doing that anyway, but it does make it harder to be flexible. Marvin, there are systems that drone systems that you could take imagery and estimate, ground cover that's weeds and not crop with your drone and then use that. The problem with some of those systems is turnaround time can be a little slow. So um, it is a little bit of an, much like a lot of what we do in agronomy, it's a little bit of an art as much as it is a science in terms of making that estimate at this point in time. But I think we'll get there. I think that will be one good use of historical maps of as applied data and weed pressure.
Sarah, a couple of them really mentioned that there was a learning curve to this and being okay with kicking it on and spraying out at some point if needed, if need be. And he goes, I remember specifically our one, he goes, we know that we're supposed to be using this for site specific, but we also have to realize that it's okay to go ahead and spray some other stuff if you have more or a little bit left over at the end. He goes, but we are getting better. And so what your comment is, by the middle of the season, it felt like that guys were getting along better. And so, yeah, I think that was, it just seemed like everybody I talked to said there was a learning curve to some of this.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's true with any new situation, whether it's technology or new crops or whatever, right? You got to kind of go through the process a few times before you figure out how it works for you. And I do think one of the things that I didn't say when we were going through the comments, Jeannie, is that multiple guys talked about the fact that for the See and Spray types of systems, if they have two spray operators to choose from, they're going to put the one that maybe is the little better operator, however you define that, in the See and Spray system over the broadcast system.
Okay. So I have one more quick question, Sarah. Do you have more plans in the future for more research on this type of systems for 25 and beyond?
Yeah, so I have a student that Igor has been an intern in my program for almost 2 years now, and he's going to start a master's project looking at some more locations of that prescription type of study that we mentioned in this presentation. And also, we are going to do something kind of analogous to the Arkansas data that I showed you, but we're going to do it on farm with 120-foot passes and try to get some information on the relative benefits of broadcast versus the green on green targeted only and the green on green with the broadcast, targeted plus broadcast. So those are the things that we have planned in the near future. We're also in talks with, and I see Deepak, I think, is listening today. He and I are in talks with another company that specializes in drone imagery and building drone sensors and looking at how that could maybe complement or be an alternative for some folks to systems like the See and Spray.
Okay. Okay. Looks like we're about out of time here. I would like to remind all of our participants that we do have the new 2025 K-State Weed Guide available in some of the offices. We're having a little bit trouble getting them to them, but it's available online as well. So check at your local extension office to see if the 2025 K-State Chemical Weed Booklet is out for you. Also, if you registered for this one, then you're registered for all the rest of the webinars. So you don't have to register each time for the webinars. And you should be getting every morning before the webinar starts, you should be getting a reminder and the copy of the slides and where they were at as well. So any more questions? If not, again, we'll see you next Tuesday, February 18th for our next K-State Research and Extension Crop Talk.